Cool, in today's video we're going to speak about something which is massively important if you're stuck in the grips of feeling anxious or feeling insecure in yourself, and you're kind of caught in a conflict where you're in a situation, whether it's at work, whether it's in your life in general, and you want people to perceive you as confident, you want people to perceive you in a certain light, you want people to perceive you as professional, but due to that conflict, it's actually causing a huge amount of anxiety, huge amount of stress, huge amount of oppression, and just causing a huge imbalance where externally how people perceive you is totally disconnected from how you actually feel. Cool, so the reason why I'm talking about this week is because a couple of clients I've spoken to over the past couple of weeks have suffered from this exact problem. The first one, he's in a situation where he perceives that everyone at work perceives him as the go-to guy, the super confident, the person to rely on in every way. Yep, and due to the fact that he actually doesn't feel that way, and he's learned over the years to project confidence using his tone of voice, using his body language, but repress on the opposite side how he actually feels. So it's created a massive disconnect where initially when it started off, it was a kind of fine pattern, maybe when he was 20, and he was just making himself look a little bit confident than how he felt. But obviously the more he does that, the more insecure he actually feels about how he actually feels, because the more worried we get, that kind of imposter syndrome, thinking that what's going to happen when people actually see how I really do feel, that I really do feel nervous, I really do feel scared, that I really do feel overwhelmed, that I really do, question myself, and my confidence isn't anywhere near as high as I actually outwardly project through my tone of voice, through my body language, and through my expressions. So what happened with this individual person is this probably went on around 20 years. In fact, the whole 20 years, that gap kind of got bigger and bigger and bigger. So he got promoted, he did well in his business, he went further and further and further, and then he had more pressure, then he had more people relying on him, and then he had greater and greater expectancy that he was this confident, kind of alpha male-esque guy who could be relied on and to deal with the challenges, whatever arose. So people probably added more pressure on him and got more things to do, but inwardly he was totally shut down, anxious, scared, full of anxiety, and constantly worrying that he was going to get found out, and people are actually going to see how he actually felt. So what happens when people kind of get caught in an anxiety conflict like that? Well, the first thing to recognize is that most people tend to double down. So most people tend to just keep going in the same direction, thinking that the balance is okay. And this particular person, the impact it had on his relationship and the impact it had on his well-being was pretty horrific, where, it was a direction that if it had kept going maybe just a couple more years, it would have cost him his marriage, which should, really had such a severe impact on his children. It would have probably eventually led to him losing his role that he'd worked all those years for. So, he might have lost, and then he might have ended up in a much lower paid job. So it would have probably cost him 20, 30 years of much, much higher pay on the positions that he could have had. So the effect is absolutely huge in every way. But, the kind of frustration is that with this pattern, like many patterns, they're not particularly complicated to solve. So, they're not massively difficult to solve. It's not that someone cannot solve it and that's why they continue in the same direction. It's purely that when we get caught in a double bind like that, what happens is we tend to resist and double down and continue in the same direction. This is normal human instinct. I do this, every person does this. But it ultimately leads to having, Armageddon-like, apocalyptic-like problems in our life for an issue that we could have solved, for an issue that wasn't that challenging, for an issue just because we didn't know how to solve it doesn't mean that it wasn't solvable. So it leads people in this direction where these things build and build and build and build and build. So maybe in your own life, there's part of that within you where you try and, want people to perceive you as maybe confident or maybe clever, as maybe professional, maybe good looking, or maybe successful, or whatever it is. And this is something that's really valuable to you and you want it to happen. In order to make it happen, you're projecting those things in a way that falsely kind of creates a narrative where there's you and how you feel, and then there's all these things you're putting in front to try and get people to look at those things. This is the same as when I work with business owners who are doing really, really, really well. Nearly always, not always, but mostly always, they have really flash cars and really big houses. And very often, those things can sometimes be, have a huge conflict where people then begin to rely on those things and want to be judged and perceived for the role that they do, maybe for the business they own, for the car they have, And the more they kind of add these layers on top, what happens is it enables someone to not deal with the insecurities they have within. So to manage them, to hold on to them, to ignore them, to repress them. Which when we do that, the energy gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, either leading as a secondary effect to chronic stress or anxiety, or often leading to someone feeling depressed or just totally emotionally disconnected from themselves, which is pretty much always going to end up with our relationship falling apart at some point. Cool. So in my own life, I've had these challenges as well where, we want people to look at us a certain way. We want to feel strong in ourselves. We want to feel good in ourselves. But there's really only one way to do that, which is knowing in ourselves that anxiety, stress, the effect it's had on us throughout our whole life, it's the single most important thing to resolve in our life. If we don't resolve it, it will continuously bring up our insecurities, trigger our stress response, make us feel anxious, make us feel tense, make us be unable to create emotional intimacy in our relationships, make us be unable to feel excited, motivated, confident, strong at work. And, although the effects can vary between different people, the cause, is always the same. For any person, if you're suffering from this type of issue or this type of problem, just knowing yourself that 90% of the challenge is just breaking through that resistance. It's just understanding that it's not worth managing. So manage it with pills, potions, with silly habits, with silly techniques. Actually resolve the foundation as to why you feel that way, so you can release that and move forward totally free of it for the rest of your life.